Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be entitled Frank Olson, Fort Detrick Bioweapons Laboratory. Alright, so I'm having a lot of technical problems this morning, so I'm going to reduce my details and level of minutia from what you're normally accustomed to, but out of respect to my East Coast audience, I do want to continue along the felonious path of murder most foul, and I've shared extensively the homicidal assassinations that occur constantly here in Alta, California. And today I'm going to focus and shine some light on Fort Detrick, Maryland, because of course it's right under your nose. It's right near New York City. It's near New Jersey. And it's a highly dangerous facility. And of course, it's only 33 miles from where Dr. Anthony Fauci has an office and where his lovely wife, Christine Grady, also has an office at the National Institute of Clinical Health. The National Institute of Health Clinical Research. What I wanted to tell you is that in case you didn't know, Anthony Fauci's wife went to Georgetown University where she got an undergraduate degree and a PhD. And then she went on to Boston College to get a master's degree. And she's a bioethicist with a nursing background. She got a master's in nursing administration from Boston University. But she presents herself as a bioethicist, which is kind of an oxymoron and kind of a shame for Boston College and Georgetown if they want to put on any kind of a semblance that they're some kind of an important educational facility. How the hell can you justify ethically the murder of human beings, human experiments, killing beagles, little beagle dogs, monkeys, mice, and rats by injecting them with the Ebola virus, the HIV, SARS-CoV, experimental fake vaccines, bioweapons research? How the hell can you call yourself a bioethicist when the whole program is completely and utterly criminal, unethical, and should be concreted in? Anyway, what I want to tell you is that Fort Detrick, Maryland is located in Frederick, Maryland. It's named after Major Frederick Detrick, who was put in charge in 1931 of an Army airfield for training pilots to take off and land in a farming area in Frederick, Maryland. Initially, it was called Camp Detrick, Maryland. But in 1943, it quickly became the United States Biological Weapons Program and given charter to develop weapons. I believe they started with anthrax, but you can bet they've gone through the whole kit and caboodle. It expanded out to 1,200 acres of farm property, plus there's underground facilities. So maybe I should double that number and say it's more like 2,400 acres. It's like it's hard to get a bead on how much square footage the Lawrence Livermore Weapons Lab has when so much of it is underground. For example, Site 300, named after Ernest Lawrence, who was involved with the Manhattan Project. That's where the Lawrence Livermore National Lab got its name, from Ernest Lawrence, who was a member of the Sons of Toil and the Bohemian Club, if you didn't know. Anyway, Site 300 boasts of having 7,600 acres of land, and it's pretty much entirely underground. This would include the property where the Altamont Free Concert was had, where Meredith Hunter was bayoneted to death on December 6th, 1969. This is the property that the Department of Energy owns. And underneath that ground somewhere is Site 300, which is the weapons disposal facility for the Lawrence Livermore Lab, which I call the Weapons Lab, which anyone who works there refers to as the Weapons Lab. But for public relations purpose, I guess they want you to think they're curing cancer, which I can assure you they are not. Anyway, Fort Detrick, Maryland, in Frederick, Maryland, has changed over the years, and I think a lot of that farmland has been plowed over to have residential homes. So now you have a bioweapons laboratory kind of hiding in plain view, essentially. Where it used to be in rural Maryland, it's now a vibrant community. Anyway, you should know that Frank Rudolph Emanuel Olson was a captain in the United States Army, and he was a scientist, and he was assigned to Camp Detrick. And let's just go through a little bit of background on Frank Olson, because it's very important. His family has been suing the United States government for decades over the murder of their father. Anyway, he was born he was an American, what's called a bacteriologist, bioweapons warfare scientist, biological warfare scientist. He was an employee of the United States Army Biological Weapons Laboratories, which has an acronym, in case you didn't know, USBWL. He was assigned to Camp Detrick. It was initially called Camp Detrick. It is now referred to as Fort Detrick, Maryland. He was losing interest in his work as part of the MK Ultra program, which reported to Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of the CIA's MK Ultra program, specifically assigned to that program by Allen Dulles back in June 1953. That's when Sidney Gottlieb rose to prominence for the CIA. You should know that Sidney Gottlieb is a Jewish boy who was born in New York, raised in the Bronx, and attended Caltech, where he got a PhD in chemical engineering. And just to cut to the chase, it appears that Frank Olson was stepping down. He resigned his position as a biological warfare scientist at Camp Detrick in 1953. He was then invited by the powers to be at the CIA to attend a mandatory 3-day resort the few days before Thanksgiving 1953. His memorandum was called Camouflage Winter Meeting for Script Writers, Editors, Lecturers, and Sports Magazine Writers. Unofficially, it was referred to as the Deep Creek Rendezvous, where 12 people would be in attendance, 12 men, no women. Anyway, what Frank Olson did not know, of course, is that the other 11 attendees would be receiving different explanation as to what the 3-day conference would be about. The 12 people that were invited, 8 were from the United States Army and 4 were from the Langley, Virginia CIA office. Frank Olson was closest to Vincent Rouette. Vincent Rouette volunteered to pick up Frank at his home from his family and drive him to Deep Creek Lake, which, if you don't know, it's 130 miles due west from Fort Detrick, Maryland. Still in Maryland, but it's very rural. They drove to a large 2-story cabin off Route 219. The nearest neighbor was 100 meters away. They were joined at this meeting by none other than Sidney Gottlieb himself. I'll give you the list of men that were attended this Deep Creek Lake Resort meeting. One wonders what's buried at the bottom of Deep Creek Lake, don't you think? It's kind of a funny name, right? So Frank Olson, who was a member of the Special Operations Division of the United States Army Biological Weapons Warfare, he's in attendance. In fact, he's the star person because he's the only one that's resigning. And with him is his close friend, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Rouette, who is Olson's direct supervisor and sort of his control agent. John L. Schwab, who founded the division during 1953 and was serving as the laboratory chief department head. John Stubbs was another personnel from Fort Detrick. for the United States Army. Benjamin Wilson, a member of the Special Operations Division of the Army. Herbert Burt Tanner, another Army personnel from Fort Detrick. John C. Malinowski, who is a Fort Detrick staffer, and he didn't drink alcohol, and therefore he was not dosed with any LSD during this 3-day mandatory resort. Gerald Yonitz, who is also a Special Operations Scientist, Special Operations Division Scientist of Fort Detrick. Then we have 4 CIA employees. Sidney Gottlieb, who's a chemist by training, but is in charge of Project MK Ultra for the CIA. We have Robert Lashbrook, who is Sidney Gottlieb's deputy, and he's the one who provided the liquor for everyone except for John Malinowski. Everyone was drinking except him, although from different bottles. And I understand that they dosed certain bottles with LSD. Then we have A. Hughes, who is with the CIA, and Henry Borther, also from the CIA. Now, what you need to know, people, is even though 8 of the guests are from the United States Army, Fort Detrick, and 4 are from CIA, Langley, Virginia, and that adds up to 12 people, virtually all of them work for the bankers. They all work for the CIA, all of them. And whether you're called a captain in the United States Army, like Frank Olson was, he was a captain, doesn't matter what your rank is. You're working for the clandestine services if you're working at a bioweapons lab, or if you're working at the Lawrence Livermore lab, or if you're working at the Los Alamos lab, or if you're working at one of the prominent universities that receives federal grant funding and happens to have a linear accelerator like Stanford University does, or if you don't have a linear accelerator, but you are receiving parsed out subcontract work from Fort Detrick or Lawrence Livermore Lab, you are within the clandestine services umbrella. So in other words, you can work at University of California or Harvard or Stanford or Princeton or Yale or Georgetown or Columbia University or MIT, and you can be working for the CIA. Yes, you can, through the grant funding from the clandestine services budget. And by the way, there's 2 budgets, one that's published and ambiguous, and the other one that's concealed 100%, called money laundering. Anyway, SOD stands for Special Operations Division, which Frank Olson was a member of. Anyway, so you have this cozy little situation where a guy resigns his position at the lab, and then he's invited to a 3-day conference in a remote area called Deep Creek Lake with 11 other men, including the head of CIA MK Ultra, Sidney Gottlieb. Anyway, they spend 3 days. Allegedly, Frank Olson is dosed with LSD. He has hallucinations. He has nightmares. And Vincent Rouet drives him back to his wife for Thanksgiving so that they can celebrate Thanksgiving. That's how I like to celebrate my Thanksgiving, when I'm coming off an LSD trip, right? So the family enjoyed Thursday with Frank Olson, but then guess what? Vincent Rouet, accompanied by Robert Lashbrook from the CIA, Sidney Gottlieb's deputy, pick him up on Friday morning, and they drive him to New York City, and they take him to a Hilton Hotel. Remember, if you watch my videos, Hilton Hotel features prominently in CIA operations. So they take him to the Statler Hilton Hotel. I believe today it's referred to as the Pennsylvania Hotel, but back in 1953, it was the Statler Hilton Hotel where they check into a room, get this, on the 13th floor. And the windows did open back in 1953. All right? The mandatory retreat occurred on November 18th, 19th, and 20th. Then he was allowed to go back to his family for a few days, enjoy Thanksgiving. Then on Friday, after Thanksgiving, he was escorted by a CIA operative, Sidney Gottlieb, and another Army liaison CIA operative, Vincent Rouet, Frank Olson's direct supervisor, and they took him to the Statler Hilton Hotel, where he was to have an appointment with Harold Abramson, who's a pediatrician and an allergist. Now, you got to appreciate the fact that Frank Olson is a 43-year-old adult man with two sons. I don't know why he would need to see a pediatrician. But that's what they said. Harold Olson was checked into the 10th floor at room 1018A. These rooms are suites, and they have a door. There's A and B, right? So I don't know who else was at the Statler Hotel, but I'll bet there was a whole kill team of CIA contractors for that Friday. Anyway, Friday evening came and went, and then about 2 a.m. Saturday morning on November 28, 1953, Frank Olson is thrown out of his 13th floor window and lands face first onto the sidewalk in front of the doorman of the Statler Hotel about 2 a.m. in the morning, Saturday morning. And it's game over for Frank Olson. I don't know if they were planning to take him to Bellevue State Hospital, which is like a half a mile from the Statler Hotel. It's pretty close, where he could get electroshock treatments, which is always the go-to treatment for people who want to quit, right? This is shades of Abigail Folger. She was seeing Dr. Marvin Flick, her psychologist, for 5 days in a row before she got bayoneted 28 times to death at Cielo Drive. And here we have Frank Olson, who has what appears to be an intervention before Thanksgiving with 11 other adult men, 4 of which are from the CIA Langley office. And I guess the intervention didn't go well, so they decided, why don't you go to New York City and go take a dive out of an office building, well, out of a Hilton Hotel. Remember, Hilton Hotel, people, is made famous first for Frank Olson's Superman dive. It was then made famous for Fidel Castro's prime minister offices that he set up on January 1st, 1959 in Havana, Cuba. Then John Lennon and Yoko Ono used a Hilton Hotel in Amsterdam for their bed-in for peace in March 1969. Then Francis Gary Powers was invited to the annual Christmas party for Lockheed, which is always held at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California. That was in 1963 that Francis Gary Powers had a run-in with the creator of the SR-71 and U-2 spy planes. I can't even say the guy's name. He's such a nefarious character. Kelly Johnson. And then in about 1975-76, Buzz Aldrin was accosted by Bart Sibal, again at the Hilton Beverly Hotel. And you may remember that Robert Shapiro, who likes to have his name changed to Bob Evans, who used to be a vice president for Paramount Pictures, that he was discovered for Hollywood for Hollywood films. The kid stays in the film, even though he had no acting experience at all. And he was discovered at the swimming pool at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel. So that's 6 examples of the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel and CIA partnering together. Because I can assure you that Gulf and Western, who owns Paramount Pictures and produces many CIA epic social engineering films, is inextricably linked with our friends at the clandestine services. And that would include Bob Evans, and Fidel Castro, and Frank Olson, and Yoko Ono, and Gary Powers, who worked for the CIA flying spy missions, and Buzz Aldrin, who worked for the clandestine services and went to West Point as part of the Apollo program, and Bart Seibel, who's running controlled opposition. Anyway, I guess that's what I wanted to tell you, is that Frank Olson was murdered, and he was surrounded by CIA operatives the days before his death and the night before his death, and he was roommates with his superior. He was not roommates with his superior. The last person to see Frank Olson alive was Robert Lashbrook, who's Sidney Gottlieb's deputy. So Frank Olson was under the direct supervision of Robert Lashbrook, not Vincent Rouette, who's his Army supervisor. It was the CIA that took charge when Frank Olson, Superman, dived out of the window. Wouldn't you think that you might want to detain Robert Lashbrook for questioning? But you see, CIA murders are not subject to investigation by the New York Police Department. They don't have the authority to do that. And there was a phone call that came out of Harold Abramson's room 1018A, where he made a phone call to Sidney Gottlieb saying, he's gone, he's no longer with us. Weeks later, Sidney Gottlieb typed up a letter to all the people, Alan Dulles typed up a letter directed to all the participants of this 3-day Deep Creek Lake Resort meeting, but directed most of his vitriol to Sidney Gottlieb, where he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, the Frank Olson situation was not handled professionally. Okay, well, he was murdered and he's dead, so it sounds like a successful mission to me. Anyway, I thought you should get a handle that Anthony Fauci's office is very close to Fort Detrick. Fort Detrick, of course, is associated with Edgewood Arsenal. And let me just tell you about that in case you were wondering, because it's over 12,500 acres. Remember, Fort Detrick is 1,200 acres plus an underground facility. And then Edgewood Arsenal, where they conduct human experiments, and it's documented that they tested over 7,000 Army troops there from 1948 to 1975 that they'll admit to, using anthrax and sarin gas and testing out, protective clothing, using United States military as guinea pigs. 12,500 acres. There are 5,000 military personnel assigned there, plus 7,500 civilians. You may know it under its other name. Frank Zappa's father worked at Edgewood. In case you didn't know, Frank Zappa worked for the CIA. That is why he was employed in Hollywood, people. Anyway, Edgewood Arsenal human experiments was known as something else before it became Edgewood. There's just oodles of lawsuits, as you can imagine. It was known as the Aberdeen Proving Ground, also known acronym APG, Aberdeen Proving Ground. This is where United States Army tested weapons for years before the Bioweapons program came along. It was built in 1917, all right? And it's been in use since 1917 until today. It's still in activity today. It's supposedly the oldest active proving ground. I love how they come up with this applied linguistics, proving ground. That's where they conduct destructive activities against humans and property. It's been subject to base realignment and closure programs. It's been renamed the Edgewood Arsenal. They use toxic gas. They manufacture weapons at this facility as well as test the weapons at this facility. Nerve gas, nerve agents, psychotropic drugs like LSD, PCP, marijuana, cannabinoids, Agent BZ, irritants, alcohol, and caffeine are tested also at the Edgewood Arsenal. Anyway, I thought you should know that because it's all very disturbing. The other thing you should know is that Sidney Gottlieb, the Jewish man from the Bronx, head of MK Ultra, he was also widely referred to by his other name, known as Poisoner-in-Chief. The Poisoner-in-Chief was a title of a book, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA, Search for Mind Control. It was a book that came out in 2019 known as Poisoner-in-Chief. I think it's an apropos title. However, there's a boatload of other people, like my video yesterday, Albert Laverne, he was involved with electroshock treatments, carbon monoxide poisoning therapy, as well as Lord knows what drugs he used on Anne Kerman so that she would murder his wife. Paula Passavant from Paris, murdered on Fifth Avenue, New York, across the street from Central Park. Anyway, Sidney Gottlieb was also involved with Lockheed Martin and the U-2 spy program. He was involved with creating safe houses for pilots. I'm sure he was involved with trying to work on performance-enhancing drugs for pilots. I do believe they use amphetamines for sure. And I can assure you that men of the military are brainwashed to follow their orders, because we follow orders or people die, and we don't question the chain of command. You don't go above your supervisor, and you have an oath of secrecy. And this makes you a robot. That's really what the military wants. They want robots. They do not want people challenging their orders, even if the orders are unethical or illegal. And I think you could direct your questions to Christine Grady, because she's an expert on rationalizing the irrational. That's what a bioethicist would be. Let me justify something that's unethical, and I will call myself an ethicist. All right, well, that's enough for today. Because of my technical problems, I don't want to push my luck. But thank you, New York. Thank you, Maryland. Thank you, New Jersey. Thank you for all my viewers and listeners, because you're in the same hot mess that I am. We're all suffering together, and something needs to be done. Take care and have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.